All right, guys. So, welcome to this is my last presentation, at least from a teaching perspective. So, I would like to. We are going to be looking at chapter 3 today um, of the main text that we're looking at. And let's get going. So, again, I want to just arrange this so that I can see the names of people. Maximize that. And then bring this up. Is this clear enough for everybody? Can you see everything fairly well?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Okay. All right. Now this is a fairly, as you can see, this is a fairly long presentation. It goes into a fair amount of depth, depth in terms of what we're looking at. And today, what we're looking at particularly is the relational leadership model itself. All right. It is designed to try and lay out the 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 sort of meat of the model, and I will indicate along the way where other presentations will support what's going to be coming up with this. Um, so the idea is we're presenting this as an option for you to look at in terms of developing your own personal development, leadership philosophies, and your leadership concepts and ideas. So, in the relationship model, of course, we start with looking at what its references are. And leadership has to do with relationships. Primarily, this is going to be its key focus. And the other element is that it's also going to focus on the fact that leadership varies dependent on the context, and the context itself will establish the types of relationships. So consider, for example, if you're a teacher in a classroom as opposed to a manager in a departmental store. Those contexts will help to determine the nature of the relationships that you're likely to develop with people around you, because those things sort of, what's the word I want to use, dictate certain types of behavioral traits and commonalities that will help to make the experience different. But in all cases, the leadership model focuses on the nature of the relationships we develop with each other in the action of being either a leader or follower within the organization. The If we remember, all right, Julia's on the way in. Hi, Julia.
Um,
Miss Watson, welcome. All right, we are right. So, if we remember, the definition of leadership from this model is uh, a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now, again, there's some serious differences here to some of the other definitions we've come across so far. Here, again, their focus is on positive change and how they arrive at that, and of course, the fact that it is an ethical issue. Now, the context in which this model developed came out of a lot of the past failures that we've seen in fe- in leadership, especially with the type of leadership that we tend to see around us. So we decided, for example, this program decided to use this particular model because in 2008, 2010 in Trinidad, we had some financial crises that hit the world market, but also impacted um, in 2010 directly in our market here. And we saw a plethora of unethical behavior taking place among financial leaders, among politicians, and it signaled to us that there was a gap in understanding about primarily what ethics is all about, and how ethics and leadership are linked to each other, and which is one of the reasons why this model is the one that we choose to focus on, because it combined the um, two areas that we felt was in dire need in the country. And since then, it has been quite a useful course. that we have been able to do with students. And most times at the end of the course, most of the people who have accomplished or completed the course, see it as a positive element or something that they were glad that they were able to do because it gives them an option. The objective of the college is that hopefully in the future we will, be able to produce a set of individuals who will arrive in leadership positions, who will have a better understanding of what it means to be a leader and how ethics plays an important part in that process. And secondly, we would also be looking at developing, um, positive outcomes rather than focused only on personal and selfish outcomes. So the model itself focuses on five components, and we'll be looking at this in a lot of more details. All right, it's going to look at purpose, inclusivity, empowerment, ethical, of course, the thing, and it's going to be looking at the whole concept of it being process oriented. So if we were to read this sort of definition here, the relational leadership model is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view. Empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. And we'll get to process oriented now at the end. So this is a physical, or I should say, a visual or graphical representation of that concept, where we have the purpose kind of centered, giving us direction, being a subset of being inclusive, empowerment, and ethical values, and all surrounded by this process orientation that these components have to take in terms of being developed. All right. Now, the model itself is not descriptive of current leadership practices, but provides an, an ideal against which we are hoping we could move towards. So it's an aspirational model, one that we're hoping people will utilize to inspire them towards moving to better types of ethical and leadership sorts of activities. The framework that connects these five keys um, will help us to understand that approach that we're going to look at. So the first area in terms of purpose is it's important because purpose influences everything. Kind of think about yourselves. Most of you all are in this class because this program that you're in, the various programs that you're in, have a connection with some goal that you have. And hopefully the connection is clear to you that you're here because you have a vision or a mission or some sort of goals that you've been working towards achieving in your life. And this program is part of the things. It's why you're doing what you're doing. So it's the same influence that purpose gives to organizations and its leadership. So when an organization is working to trying to achieve something, its goals determine a lot of the behaviors of the individuals as well as a lot of the actions that they get up to. All right. It means that if we think about it from that position, most organizations are driven by a vision. We would prefer, or the model prefers, that organizations be vision driven and not position driven. Now, what's the difference? Um, we'll come back to this in another segment, so we might as well deal with it here, so we can understand it from both points of view immediately. So, a vision, the way in which a vision drives an organization is that you have this goal or objective, and you're working towards it. Position driven refers to an individual who sits or holds a leadership position, driving the organization because of their desires and dreams. Now, you find this happening a lot with family-oriented businesses and activities. And when somebody, the key individual in that family, moves along, dies and passes away, it on sometimes negatively impacts upon the organization. I've seen this happen with a number of businesses here in Trinidad. We had the Amar group of companies that suffered when the father died, and they sort of lost their way. We also had Kipalanis. Are any of you all familiar with those names that I'm calling out? We had John Williams down south. That's another organization that, with the absence of the key individual, the organization lost its traction. And that's because it sat around what an individual wanted, as opposed to having a commonality of vision that was bought in by all the shareholders and stakeholders in the organization that helped to move them forward. You follow what I'm talking about? Like, consider, for example, what are your personal visions? How many of you all have been asked that question when you go to a job interview? Have any of you all been asked that question? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 or 10 years?
No, sir, I don't think I've been
Yep.
asked.
Always ask
Uh,
that
Been asked
question.
that
We
multiple
you've
started.
been?
times, too many
No?
times.
Too many times? What's your answer going to be? Or what would it be now?
Stable.
What's that? Sorry?
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Nicole, go ahead.
Right. So I regularly have this conversation with my father, and what we always end up doing is that in the 5 years we come up with various short-term plans. How would these short-term plans lead into our long-term plans, and then our 5-year plans?
Right. So, um, and they impact upon what you do at any point in time, not so?
Yes.
So you see a direct connection between these goals that you've set and the behaviors and actions that you get involved with. Okay. Um, Jeannie, Jenny, sorry, see your hand up.
So most of the time when they ask that question, I would say a human resource manager under the healthcare department.
You'd see what? So, I'm not making you out clearly.
So I would say answer to that question now, as of recently, would be a human resource manager in the healthcare.
Uh huh. But the question would be, in terms of answering the question, how do you go about, and how? Oh wow. Sorry, guys. How do you go about answering that question, Miss Williams? Okay, I'm probably not understanding it. Anybody else has that whole idea of having been asked at any point in time? Yes, Snags.
Yeah. Well, since it changed now because I get a little older, but I feel like every time you go over by your grandparents, I was asking you, or maybe it's just me. But at first, I was just like, to find out what I want to do in life, I would have that in my head that I would know what I want to do in life and I'll pursue it. But now I'm just thinking in 5 years, is that or 10 years?
It doesn't matter. 5, 10
I'm
years.
thinking
Mm.
I would have my life together, working and getting better at my profession. That's why I say.
Uh huh.
And being happy, comfortable.
Comfortable. What does that mean, though? Being happy and comfortable. Is that an income thing? A type of.
Yeah,
All
kind
right.
of income, but also living a peaceful life,
All
as
right.
peaceful as possible.
All right.
This
Does that
has always been my goal.
all right. So does that include like getting married, having children, things like that?
Oh, I didn't think that far. But
Okay.
yeah, 10 years. How will I be?
Yeah.
Probably,
Well,
yeah.
you got to kind of think about it. And I mean, how old are you now?
Um, 19,
So 10 years
19.
from now, you're what? Cracking.
29, that's
Exactly.
crazy.
That 30 years old. Life done, as far as
I
you
can't believe
concerned.
I got to 20. I'd be feeling kind
Old?
of,
You
kind
feel
of
old?
mature.
Mature?
20, 20 sounding like a. age
It does it now. Well, it is two
right now.
decades.
That just
It
right now. So
Yeah, it's 2 decades. Well, wait till you get to my age, and then you'll start um, looking at numbers differently. All right. So, thank you for sharing, guys. Okay. So, purpose and vision is something that is oftentimes pulled together to be able to move us forward. It makes us get up and go and look for something, go and get qualified. You're not here because you're just by chance doing things. You've selected to do these programs or these courses because it kind of locks in step with something that you see of for yourself in the future. Now, in order for us to really develop our own personal visions of where we're going, we really need to spend some time engaging in this activity here, which is the knowing, being, doing thing that we dealt with in the first unit that we talked about. Understanding yourself and meaning that knowing yourself involves engaging in the process of developing your knowledge base. So that's part of what you're doing here. You're developing your expertise, your knowledge. And in the interim, what we're hoping that you will do while you're going through the process, in the knowing, being, doing approach, you also develop an awareness of yourself. What are those values that you hold? And or you, as young as you are, you're developing an awareness, and concretizing the type of values that you're going to hold as being most important, and then putting those things into practice. Um, because as you acquire more and more knowledge, it's going to feed into how you interact with people around you, and that is going to also impact upon your value structure, because certain things will become important, other things will fall to the wayside, and it will all engage or find itself seeing itself being exhibited in the way in which you interact with people around you, interact with things around you. The process, however, this knowing being process is something that's going to happen over and over again, because unless you decide to go and lock yourself away in a under a rock somewhere, this pattern of knowing is something that always improves and increases. In fact, the college itself is committed to creating you guys, or making you guys understand that you are engaged in lifelong learning. For the rest of our lives, we will continue learning and adding to the body of information and knowledge that we acquire, either through study or experience or combination of them. And it helps us to continuously evaluate our values and belief structures, which then directly impacts upon how we behave and what we do. So it's a process that they refer in the textbook as circular, but I really see it as spiraling, because every time you go through that process, you ought to be improving and enhancing your awareness, broadening your perception. So one of the things I can encourage you guys to do, if you haven't done it before, is travel. When you travel and visit other countries, I'm not telling you go and stay, but if you travel and go and visit other countries, one of the things that allows you to do is to see life from different perspectives and experience different countries, because the way in which we do things here in Trinidad is just one option. There are other options, and some of them are close at hand. You could go across to Barbados, you could go somewhere down the islands and see what life is like there, as well as going into third world countries or into further developed countries like the United States, New York, and all that, those places that people commonly go to, or off the beaten track, and go other places and just experience life in those contexts. It broadens your knowledge, it broadens your perception, it impacts upon what you see as being really critical and important, and also impact upon your behavior of how you interact with people. Palmer in the text made the connection between the knowing, being, doing with head, heart, and practice when he was looking at the teaching profession. And this is one that I felt coming out of the text would connected with me, because as a teacher, it resonated in the sense that the head refers to my technical information, my knowledge, the skills that I have. The heart really speaks to the spirit and my love of the work. And those two things directly impact upon my practice, which is my teaching practice. Now, for most of us, fortunately, we've had good experiences with teachers in the past who have had really good understanding of their material, and more importantly, they've had a passion for the work that they've engaged with, and we found it coming through our practice. But I've also had experiences with people who may have known a lot, but they lacked that heart. They lacked the passion for teaching. In fact, they just probably didn't want to really teach. They're just there for whatever purpose, or at the time they were despondent about what they were doing, and it impacted upon their practice. And those were the times I had experiences with poor lecturers, and had a rough time with those people. Anybody here would be able to identify with something along those lines, in terms of experiencing great teachers in your lifetime, those with a lot of passion. For anybody here from graphics, doing the graphics program? No. Communication program, media program, that type of stuff? No. Um, we
Sorry,
have
so what was the question?
what program are you doing?
Oh, graphic design.
Right. Do you know Miss Ferguson?
Yes, of course I know Miss Ferguson.
Right. Isn't she like this? Somebody who's really passionate about her graphic works and stuff.
Yeah, she's very, very passionate.
Yes, and this is when I think of passionate teachers, she comes to mind. She's one of the most passionate, and openly so. She has no cover for her mouth, as she say. Whatever
Yeah,
she
so
feels, it comes up.
basically, when we present work, we are always faithful because she will tell you like it is, and she says it's out of love because she's passionate about graphic design.
Yeah, if it wasn't for that particular teacher, that department would be seriously lacking. I'll just let you know. But you have a good bit of passionate people in that department, actually. Each one at different levels. Mr. Bachan Singh is also one, but he's more in the media area. Um, for those people who are doing journalism and stuff like that, he's really, really passionate in that area. But you may have come across him in communication classes. All right. So the thing about this knowing, being, doing thing is that it is critical across the board for us to realize that it's part of our personal developmental process. And it's something that's going to directly impact upon whether or not people believe us or not. Because unless you become an expert in your field, people will not think of you as being credible. Those people who are credible, we are quite willing to work with, because we see them as being valuable elements of people we work with in terms of getting jobs done or getting things done. All right. As a leader, you must demonstrate competence. And in order to demonstrate that competence, you must maintain a certain amount of knowledge in the field that you're working in, or the field that you're operating in. If you don't have that that knowledge, then you need to find it. You need to get it. Right. Um, Choicing. Okay, cool. Clarissa, so do you agree with my assessment of Miss Ferguson? There's one thing I do is I miss. You can put it in the comments if you want. Yes, great. I expect as much because she is that larger than life character. I do miss meeting with her often. We were smoking buddies actually on campus when she used to smoke. Now I think she vapes. All right. Now, in order for us to help develop this knowing, being, doing thing, there are four areas of skills in terms of knowledge that we need to develop. The one that we've been talking a lot about is technical skills. Those are things we acquire in terms of the expertise required for the profession that we're in. The trickier ones are going to be interpersonal, tactical, and conceptual. Conceptual skills are skills of creativity, and unfortunately, sometimes our education system has sort of drummed that a bit out of us. So it's a little bit of a steep learning curve to kind of get that back in us, because in some instances it was beaten out of us, or it was bullied out of us by teachers who just didn't want us to be free thinkers. The interpersonal skills, which is the effective communication, is something that this program actually has a number of courses to help design and work with you guys to help develop your communicative skills, effective communication, both in the spoken and written word. It's really important. This is what probably one of the reasons why a lot of people fear presentations is because they have these communication barriers that they need to work with. Then we have tactical skills, the ability to negotiate with other people, to develop good human relations, to be able to work well in groups. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of the courses in COSTAT and courses that you get involved with have an extreme amount of group work, including this class. How many of you all hate group work? Let's see those hands. Why do you not like group work? Reshma.
Because not everybody does be on the same page. Okay?
Uh huh, that's true. But how do we get people on the same page? Miss Liverpool,
Oh,
welcome.
We adapt and find compromise.
Yes, but there are lots of other things we need to do too. But yes, that's one thing. Miss
Delegate
Liverpool.
responsibility.
Oh, delegation is a tricky thing. Delegation does not give up. But yes, one of the things that often happens with group work is that some people are unable to um, give over responsibility to other people because they are fearful of, you know, they may not do it the way you would want to do it, especially those of us with sort of OCD tendencies. Yes. Uh huh. But the reason why is because what we're trying to do is to develop these tactical skills. Because when you go out to work in the real world and getting involved with real life, you do not work in a silo by yourself. You work with other people. Despite what we would like to do, we have to work with other people. All right. Human beings are by nature social animals, and we therefore will have to work together. Now, for any of you all who knew Professor Julian from, well, the last place he was working was at UTT. He passed away now. The biggest thing that he was a chemical, specifically a petrochemical engineer, and the one thing that he talked about that was problematic for the field was that the technical skills was always, really, really good. The problem that they faced was all those soft skills. That's what he referred to in terms of the soft skills. Um, and that soft skills is what he was talking about here, the interpersonal communication skills and the tactical skills of working with others. Those soft skills were the problem that he found um, was is a major part of trying to get people to be able to work together, because being qualified in hold on a second, guys, give me a second there. All right, sorry about that, guys. Just had to take that call quickly. Okay, so um, one of the reasons why we have so many what we call college core courses that you have as part of your degree program is to help in the development of your interpersonal and tactical skills and some of your creativity skills. So even though you're doing graphic arts or you're doing um, radiology, we ask you to do things like leadership and ethics. We ask you to do things like communications. We have some math requirements, which you can see the linkages. Although graphic people might say, no, why not see any linkages with mathematics in my area? In fact, in journalism, they have some selections, and a lot of the students in journalism choose to do this course, or they may choose general economics as another course that they utilize to help to broaden their perspective. Why? It's because it's designed to try and develop your tactical skills and in person. In the past, degree programs were designed only around the technical skills required for the job, not with the other skills. And it led to a situation where a lot of people qualified in fields are unable to work with others. They don't have the interpersonal nor the tactical skills of negotiation and group work to be able to work with other human beings, and it creates lots of problems on the job site. Um, and it creates not just problems, it stops production, it gets in the way of things, and the whole organization can break down as a result of a lack of the ability to work well with other people. So that's why that this area is really important for that developing. Of course, we know the being part of it has to do with your who you are, what you are in terms of your value structure, and that's something that is going to change and morph as time moves on. In a lot of instances, we start from a very um, idealistic position, and then we start to get a little more realistic. But at the end of the day, those values that we hold really dear to us, we inherit from our families and from the people around us, because they influence the way we look at the world and the way it works. And those things are going to be important in terms of impacting, as I said, both the knowledge and our being part of our value structure is going to impact upon how we do things. And again, this is a process that we're going to be keep on going over and over again, because the whole thing about it is that we have to keep on developing ourselves and redeveloping and redefining. We're not going to end up as this static entity. Now, in the doing element, we sometimes come across an unwillingness to act, and that unwillingness to act is because we are looking for perfection. And in some instances, what we find happening is that unwillingness to act, especially among leaders, creates a situation where organizations begin to stall. And that fixation on perfection also signals to everybody else, don't take chances. Now, this is one of the most important things in life that you could ever learn, and that is you can't run around, um, you can't do things in life and not be afraid of failure. I'm sorry, and be afraid of failure. You have to take risks and look at failure as opportunities to learn. That's a really important thing, because if we didn't make mistakes, there wouldn't be room for improvement. There is no expectation that we will do things perfectly the first time around. Unfortunately, I've had leaders in positions of power who um, led to situations like this. They did not want to do anything unless all the things that they felt were necessary to get that job done were in place. And that led to stunting of the organization. It slowed its growth and development, which tends to run into serious problems. Um, most of have any of you here ever done entrepreneurship? The course Fundamentals of Entrepreneurship. Show of hands, anybody? Yeah, daily. When you did entrepreneurship, what was one of the things they dealt with in terms of risk?
In terms of
Risk, taking risks.
risk, oh, well, I don't remember completely, but the main thing was that being an entrepreneur, there's always some level of risk involved.
And
Um,
you try to mitigate for it, yes. But if you
yes,
if you are risk averse, what's going to happen? If you're not willing to take on risks, you can't be an entrepreneur. It's
that is
very
true.
yeah, it's very straightforward. If you are unwilling to take risks, you will never be able to develop a business, because that's in essence what you have to do, is to be able to walk in the dark, because you honestly can't see what is coming. You have to take a chance and hope, and you work towards the best opportunities. And that's what they're talking about here. A lot of people fail in leadership positions because they are afraid to make mistakes, and that then signals to everybody around us, hey, we can't make mistakes around this person, and it means the organization sort of grinds to a halt. Um, so that's something that you're going to have to be dealing with. How do we develop this whole situation in terms of learning? So as a leader, you should promote learning through your own learning, as an example, helping others to learn, either through sharing the information you have or by the third part, creating a culture within the organization that helps to promote learning for everybody. That makes sense. So those are the elements that you could get into in place if you are in leadership positions or you're looking for leaders who would help do this type of activity. Mentoring and helping people along the way is usually going to be a really good thing for you to deal with. So we refocus now on the purpose element. So the purpose of the organization is what is going to drive the organization towards that positive change. So we have to identify what is that positive outcome we're looking at. What is that positive purpose? Arriving at that positive purpose has to be something that is shared among all the members of the organization. And this is going to bring us to this whole concept of personalized vision versus socialized vision. What we would like to happen in the best circumstance is that the vision that is developed with for an organization should be a socialized vision and not a personalized vision. Personalized visions refer to something that's very it's owned and operated through one individual. It's their idea and they are telling us this is what we will be doing. You don't have choices. You just have to do what is required to meet the personal vision of the individual. This happens a lot, as I said, in small companies with very limited people. It creates some problems, especially when you start bringing in employees because they don't understand your vision because you're unwilling to share it, so on. That's something that you have to work a lot harder. If you have a personal vision, you have to make sure that the people that you bring into the organization will also share in that. So you have to move from that personalized vision to a socialized vision. Socialized visions generally are built from shared commonalities between people. So we get together and we look at where do we want to go as a group. What do we all hold as being important? What do we see as being purposeful and positive for our society? Shared vision building is a long process, but it is the superior process to the personalized vision. Because once we share in the development of the vision, it means that we all feel some degree of personal commitment towards getting there and achieving those visions. If you're able to do that, that is something that is very powerful and very hard to dismiss the individuals. It empowers them and makes them impassionate in relation to what they're doing, and they jump in with both feet and they're willing to just battle against the odds regardless of what negatives are around us to be able to build that type of stuff. That socialized vision is something that's really really important in terms of doing it. An effective leader doesn't impose that vision, their vision on other people, but really brings people together in a shared vision opportunity, and that makes for a more powerful methodology of developing the purpose of an organization, or at least recruiting people with this shared vision. All right, and it has become much easier in these days because of the way in which we are able to communicate and share instantly. Of course, there's problems related to that as well. Um, but again, here it is in our current situation. It's very easy for us to develop shared vision because you're quite open to just letting people in, discussing things online, having people commit themselves towards your particular point of view and vision, and therefore you could gather those people around you who all see the world the same way you do. All right, and you see it oftentimes with a lot of social movements that start online, GoFundMe accounts and all this type of stuff that emerge. People who start up various types of organizations for making things better for somebody else or some other group of individuals. You see it all the time around us. We read about it, especially things. So the purpose of vision and a mission is another element that the group that will be presenting the chapter on strategic direction, vision and strategic direction will take a closer look at this and how it works, because it is critical. Because we have to remember, this is what the organization's purpose is about. So just designing that purpose and moving that purpose forward is going to be the critical element that we're going to be looking at across the board. That vision is developed in a manner in which it helps to motivate people. It helps everybody to want to get to, well, think about it this way. If you are working for in an organization that you feel empowered and you feel purposeful, you feel as if what we're doing is a good thing, there are those days that you will, yes, feel tired to go to work, but when you get to work, you have a sense of, I did a good job today, we did good things today, we helped plenty people, you know. And you feel good about what you do, as opposed to working in an organization or working for an organization that just seems to be, you know, what's we don't use, you know, uh, you're sort of just doing it for doing its sake, because that's the way where you get. But more importantly, you're not seeing any value being added to the world around you with that organization. Oftentimes, that ends up with turning over people quite easily. Actually, there's a field that is very much associated with that what's the word I want to use, boy? That kind of dead end view, and that's accountancy. Yeah, a lot of accountants find themselves seeing their jobs as being pointless, just generating these numbers and that type of stuff, and they're not seeing the long run picture of what's going on, and it doesn't speak well to them in the long run. Interesting. All right. So again, we're talking about working towards this positive change, and that's something that we were just talking about. That positive purpose is what is going to pull us together to doing it. So we can't understate the importance of having that shared vision that we all feel committed to, that we know or we believe is positive for the organization around us. So that's something that we want to pay attention to as well. Now, one of the things that has to happen in a lot of organizations, because there are lots of organizations out there that start in one vein and then have to make a change, and that is working with change. So much so that we have the final chapter, leading change, is one of another chapter that we're going to deal with as well. When we speak about change, change creates problems for people. Why is that? Change is problematic because anybody wants to contribute as to why when confronted by change it often leads to some level of fear. Anybody wants to answer that question? What's the hardest thing about change?
Fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Losing a level of comfort you originally had.
That's it perfectly. Nail on the head again, guys. You're really good. Cooking with Ramco gas. All right. So what you're talking about there is as human beings, we're creatures of habit. We get accustomed to doing things in one particular way all the time. Whenever there is a change that takes place, it takes us out of that comfort zone. And that comfort zone is what we want to return to, or we try to get back there, not knowing, as the other individual talked about, we don't know whether or not we're going to be even more comfortable in the new situation, and that's it. That generally tends to lead to conflict, and it generally leads to a lot of heartache. The problem with it, though, is that the only constant thing in life is change. Everything changes around us all the time, every day. We just, choose to find our little hole and hide away in it and not get worried. But for large organizations, they don't have a choice. They have to change, or else they become obsolete. And you'd see that happening in that chapter. Most times there is a triggering event that will create the need to change. So consider, for example, the massive change in the way in which Costard operated from its origins in the year 2000 to where it is now. We did not intend to go fully online for most of our courses or for the vast majority of the work that we do now. And in 2019, we were looking at a more gradual transition into an online environment while maintaining face-to-face classes. By the end of 2019 into 2020, there was no what's the word I want to use? There was no vision of us making that holistic or that um, immediate transfer across into the online environment. But what happened was we had the pandemic. That created an absolute need. The college had to shut its doors for 3 months because the we couldn't have face-to-face classes because of the pandemic issues. Correct? You all will remember or should recall this event. In that 3 month period, us lecturers had to start working on converting all of our classes over from full time from face to face to online. Fortunately, from since the year 2009 2010, we had already started developing this secondary online classes through the Moodle environment. So, most of us had dual classes. We had some of our class on the online environment and some of our class done through face to face. So we refer to them as blended. So you didn't have to come to class every day of the week, or every week I should say. But there were certain key classes you had to attend on a face to face, and then other classes or other activities that you do on the online environment. So we did engage in a lot of training and preparation, and I think it was that allowed us to make that pivot and to make that change. We had to unfreeze the organization, as it talks about here, make massive changes. Unfortunately, we've also not followed this cycle here of refreezing ourselves in the online environment, but rather we've stayed in a very flexible state, or what we call a slushy state, to be able to adapt to further changes that come along, because ACTT is going to get involved and look at our online environment to make sure, because remember, for those of you who are not aware of this, the college was accredited for a specific type of degree, a degree delivered in a combination of face to face and online classes, not fully online. A fully online institution has to have different requirements to meet the international standards of teaching and learning in that environment. So, I mean, there's a whole host of different things we have to put in place to make sure that we're able to meet the international requirements for accreditation across the world. All right. So we can't refreeze. And that's an unfortunate thing that happens with a lot of organizations, that they make these changes that are difficult and challenging and then refreeze themselves. The difference, however, is that what they should remain is in a more slushy state, which allows for constant changes in the organization, small but steady changes all the way through. There will be less headache in relation to that. So it's something that you have to do. More than likely, in your personal lives, you would make massive changes. The triggering event might be something horrible. Somebody might pass away. You might get ill. You might get sick. You might fail at something. And it will create the trigger event for you to make significant change in your life. When you make that significant change, remember that change is the only constant, and may remain in a position where you remain flexible to the world around you. That's just some personal advice I can give you. Remain flexible so that forever in your life you will be open to change, and look for those positive outcomes, and not just lock yourself away in the comfort of your everyday life and your habits. Yes, you can have those little creature comforts, but at the same time, be ready to change for the better across the board. All right. So organizations have to borrow from that same thing. We have to regularly have make some sort of evaluation and see whether or not we have to make some adjustments, which is why we oftentimes review all of our degree programs, review the content, and you might get fed up with us when we make changes to the course curriculum, because some of you may be here for a couple of years and you would see the course curriculum or courses adjust and change. But that's the nature of life. Life is about making changes and adjusting, because some things remain relevant, other things are not. So as they become irrelevant, we have to replace them with what is more relevant, right? That's why we don't teach typing anymore. And, we actually used to teach literacy, computer literacy. Is that relevant anymore? Anybody wants to go back and do a literacy course in computer literacy? You think it's necessary?
No.
Exactly. There was a time we used to do that back in the 2007 stuff, that initial transition in the early 90s and stuff. We used to have to do that because not everybody had computer backgrounds. So they had to understand more about it. So that was part of the degree program. Now that we have people who, the computers are in your hand, on your phone, everything, that's no longer relevant. It lost its relevance many years ago, at least 15, 20 years ago. All right. Okay, so we understand this whole thing about change and the need for us to have to change. We understand that change makes people uncomfortable, but we still have to, as leaders, appreciate the need for change, but also appreciate people's normal reactions to it. So, as a leader, negotiating your way through change is a tricky one, because you have to motivate people to want that change as well. So, it's the same thing like sharing that vision. You have to do a lot of work selling that change over to the other people, both within the organization who are going to be directly impacted by whatever changes are coming, as well as people outside of an organization. We refer to those people like your stakeholders and stuff. You have to also make sure that they are also going to be comfortable. But we understand this whole concept of the vision, and that vision being part of the driver behind the organization. All right. Let's start to look at the next section here. The second step, we've dealt with purpose, so now we're dealing with inclusivity. All right. So when we talk about inclusivity, we're referring to this element here. Being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group's activity. Now, this is one of the reasons why you are oftentimes forced to work in groups in the college, because in most instances in life, you have no control over who you have to work with. We have a problem with this here because right now there is a battle on, and it's occurring in the United States, but it is going to have ramifications around the world, because diversity is seen as a negative thing by particular individuals in the US society. It's going to encourage that kind of negative thinking in other places. So we can look at, or we have been looking at, the attempts by this latest president to um, marginalize major groups, or large groups of his society, and by extension, the society in the world, eh, to make them feel like they are no longer welcome in the United States. So there's a whole pile of things that is going on there that is not inclusive in nature. Um, so this area is one that is being attacked, and attacked in a major way. The thing about this is that there is no way that we can understand different people's perspectives unless we have them with us to share that perspective. Let me ask Miss Daly. I don't know. Have any of you all here, before I get specific to Miss Daly, have any of you all here had to work with people who are blind?
So, excuse you, could just repeat what you said? Have to work with who?
People who are blind.
Oh, no.
Nope. Anybody? That's one person. Anybody here has had the
No,
opportunity
sir.
to work? Clarissa?
No, sir.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. If you were the teacher in this class and we had blind students, what would we do? What would we have to do?
Well, we would have definitely have to engage more in speech.
Correct? What else? What is what is your area? Your program area?
Are you referring to me, sir?
Yes. Well,
Um,
me is or Nadira, right?
yes, sir. Doing my bachelor's in business management, human resource.
Uh-huh. Okay. So you clean your cameras on. You clean your hair and me, your camera's on. All right, good. So you're doing the bachelor's in what you said again?
Human resources.
Right.
Business management, human resources.
Hmm. Right. So definitely we would have to be um, in a um, we'd have to convert into more direct speech, right? But
Right.
fortunately, blind people have tools that they can utilize, such as speech to
Uh,
text. Yes.
right.
Right.
Okay.
Good. Speech to text. Anything else that we can see? Braille is something that is also useful as well. But speech to text is going to be, or text to speech, I should say.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not going
th-
to say.
yeah, text to speech is something that is also important for them. I've had the interesting experience of having to teach blind people. I've had the interesting experience of having to teach blind people economics.
Oh
And in
no.
economics, there's graph work that we had to do. And I remember having to teach them, and we weren't in this online environment, we were in face to face classes. And I remember, um, interestingly enough, the gentlemen who were in my class at that time were actually field testing Costat for its ability to meet the needs of the blind welfare people, because it was the CEO of the Blind Welfare Association who was their treasurer of the organization. They're sort of like CFO kind of guy. It was really interesting having to teach these guys. It took a lot of additional work, and that's part of the problem. Part of the problem of having to work with diverse people is to put in the necessary work required to bring or to bring them within the fold. So I'm just talking about somebody here who's differently abled. But when we start to talk about people who think differently, see the world differently, we will never be able to see their perspective if we can't experience the world around us from their life. I mean, spend a week walking around a place without eyesight and see what the world is like. Spend a week locked in a wheelchair and see how much places you can't go, that you just take for granted that you can go places. We don't pay attention to the way the world looks for somebody who's wheelchair bound or has some form of mobility issues. If we are able, because again, and that's the whole purpose of bringing all the various diverse views into an organization, because the way in which they view the world is different to the way we would see it from our traditional positions or traditional points of view. And you might think, well, how does sexual orientation do that? It's the same thing. How do women see the world for a man? How do see the world in terms of the types of activities we tend to get involved with from a male perspective as opposed to a female perspective? And if you have to consider, how is the world viewed by somebody who is possibly in a male body but considers themselves female? or identifies as female. Those are the kind of situations that we have here that we have to actually be able to engage with. And it means, therefore, that we have to be inclusive to all of these individuals because it strengthens our position. It's one of the main reasons why group-based decisions is superior to individual-based decisions because they bring so many perspectives that no one individual could possibly see in the world because we're just closed basically on our own perception of what the world is going to be. We don't see it like everybody else. And so there's not just one world. I remember somebody made the statement: reality is a matter of perception, or perception is reality. Something to think about. All right. So we need to be inclusive of these individuals. We need to be able to bring in their point of view and frame of reference because it helps to broaden our decision making process. It helps to broaden our information base. And we have to do things to be able to bring those people in. Excluding them is to our own detriment, basically. Of course, we require to be able to include people, we have to practice our listening skills. And we also remember have to talk about when we listen, we have to listen with our frame of reference turned off. We have to stop listening through that frame of reference, or else we're going to start excluding people. All right. Inclusive leaders are is what we're looking for in this model. People who are open to the differences around us and valuing those differences, not just open to it, but valuing the difference. Because we need to understand their position and their point of view, and therefore we want to realize that I have never seen the world from that person's point of view, from another person's point of view. And that's the situation. We remember the two guys who were looking at the 6 and the 9 on the floor. Remember that exercise we did? We have to walk in that person's shoe to really get an idea of why or how they see the world as it is in that way. That makes sense, guys? So far, so good? Everybody's following this
Yes, sir.
inclusive element? Okay, good. So there are a whole pile of things that we're going to be looking at here in inclusivity. It's one of the reasons why chapter 5 deals with understanding others, and that actually is going to tackle that whole issue of diversity, um, especially cultural diversity, because one of the things that affects us negatively here is when we think from our own cultural blindness. We only see things based upon our 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 cultural position, and that's something that the United States unfortunately suffers from a lot. A lot of their people are culturally blind because they only view the world from their cultural perception. So you'd see that that is one of the areas of difference and diversity, not only gender diversity but diversity of culture. It's if you think about it from the perspective of how the how the world was colonized in the past. Once people started to colonize other countries around the world, what did they do? They went into those cultures, dismantled their culture, and tried to make their culture that they came in with as the dominant culture for them. And but what ends up happening, obviously, and it's part of the cultural dimensions of culture actually, is that the culture evolves. It evolves to absorb those things around it and make it part of a new type of culture that emerges. But the objective of most conquering nations is to instill upon that society the superiority of your culture over theirs, and therefore try as much as possible to stamp it out. We've seen many cases of that, historically speaking, around the world, wherever one country has moved in and taken over control. The Europeans had done it all the time. Now we have the Americans doing similar thing through different means. They do it in a more sneaky manner by dominating the media and dominating the television, in particular movies and that type of stuff. It really has that sort of impact upon our society, because consider our society is so Americanized primarily because of um, the way in which our culture was bombarded by television created for the American environment was just superseded upon ours. But it was a tactical move by them to make it, inclusive of those areas. So much so now that we can't do it on TV from the United States. We have no local programming to speak of. All right, you follow, and this is something that speaks to our inability to fight against that cultural domination coming from other societies around us. All right. We also have to practice the language of inclusivity. So we have to stop using I and I this and I and I that. And we need to be talking to each other in the form of we and all of us and together using words that help us to engage in that type of collective communication of sharing and the suppression of the individual concept. Now, this creates some sort of problems for people who find or believe themselves to be the authority on certain things. They come to the conversation believing that their perception is the most important perception and everybody else must follow. That's not the type of leadership we're looking for because we have too many of those individuals currently working around us who, believe that they are the answer to the world and the problems of the world. Because remember that at the end of the day, the leaders that we bring that present themselves to us are people we're hoping will find solutions for the problems that we have. Um, but the solutions won't be one that will exclude everybody in society around us. Um, you all are going to engage in group building. Chapter, I think it's chapter 4, 5, 6, or 7 is on groups and teams. So that we have another presentation that's going to look specifically at group building. One of the activities we have to evaluate is how we make decisions in a group. So let's ask this question: when you all are making decisions in groups, do we use voting or do we use consensus? Anybody?
So I would say at first we would use consensus, but if everybody can get on the same level, we will vote.
Really? Okay. So what happens when we make decisions through democratic means, through voting?
Through
Yes, Snags, go
voting.
ahead. Is it Snags or somebody else was going to answer?
Say it
I
was
would,
me, I was saying, through
Uh,
voting.
right, that's the democratic. But what happens when we do that?
I
All right.
would say it'll
Go
just
ahead.
get is be a faster process.
It is. It's a faster process. Yes, I would agree. Voting is a faster process. It's apparently an easier process, and do people feel included in that process?
Yes, I would say so.
hmm Okay, let's look at it this way. So we have to make a decision, and we have a group of, let's say we have a group of 50 people. So we are going to go with majority rules, right? So we have 30 people voting for one particular decision, or one particular outcome or choice. What happens to the 20 others who voted for the other choice? Think about it. How do you think they feel?
Alienated.
hmm And that is something that happens when we keep on making our decisions through voting. Now, we're not saying that democratic methodologies aren't aren't a fairly good way to do it, especially when you need quick decisions. But what you end up doing is exactly that. When you have a minority of individuals, but it's a big clump of people. You have 20 people in a group of 50 who now feel as if this decision is something that they don't like, they don't want. What then happens to this 50 strong group? The 50 strong group now becomes weakened by 20 people who don't feel as committed. They feel marginalized by the decisions that are making. So the better but more difficult way is consensus building. And that might mean that the decision that you make may not be the original options that you first came to the group with. You would probably emerge with a better alternative that includes everybody's agreement. If they think about it from that perspective. Yes, that makes sense. All right, simple things can become problematic later on. All right. Okay, so we have to also, like we talked about with the vision and mission statements and making changes there, we also have to be inclusive towards people not only inside the organization but outside and peripheral. So here we're talking about shareholders and stakeholders. So one of the best ways to look at that is to look at this particular diagram here. Stakeholders and shareholders who sit on the peripherals, some are more impacted the um, by the organization's activities than others, especially when we make significant changes. So, in evaluating our shareholders or stakeholders, we have these four groupings that we can put them into. At the end of the day, we're trying to get everybody into a supportive stance, but we may start off with people being highly antagonistic, problematic, or people who just, it doesn't really matter to them because it's of low priority and to them, or just problematic across the board, low priority and high opposition, high support, right? So what we're looking at here is trying to get everybody into this position here of being supportive. And supportive in the event where it is high importance, not low importance. Because if you end up in low priority, you're going to find people will not respond to you. Because although it may be critical to you, to these individuals who are outside, they're not seeing it as being anything worth their time or effort. This actually happens a lot when. How many of you all have ever conducted research in the college and sent out like a survey monkey um, questionnaire to students to fill in some sort of things, and you get back the responses. First off, you get low participation, and secondly, you get responses back from people that really they're not thinking, especially when those questions that you have the range of agree, strongly agree, neutral, strongly disagree. You all know that one, that type of question where you have these range of positions to take, and you see somebody filling it out, neutral, 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 or don't know. They're just given that common center line answer all the ways through. You're familiar with that type of
So I'm one of those neutral people
why? Why?
because like I just feel like the answers are neutral to it. So doesn't know the answer. So it's
Right.
put neutral.
Yeah, you will actually end up in the middle of the distribution across the board because the vast majority of people tend to fall in that area. And it's going to be probably one of the more common things there. But are people really thinking it through and answering the questions? Or just taking the easy way out and just clicking the center all the way down? You understand what I'm talking about, right? All
So
right.
that's similar to the lecture evaluation that they gave us
Correct. The
at the
same thing. I,
system.
I prefer you choose a side. Don't jump in the middle. All right. Uh, it's either you you absolutely agree with me or you absolutely hate me. I need to know that because then coming up with that type of decision make or those types of responses, it would necessitate a change. All right. If you keep getting this run of the mill, people will just remain the average type of individual that they tend to be. All right. So that's something that you want to think about. All right. Now the next area here is empowerment. So when we speak about empowerment, what we're talking about is how power is used by the leader in the organization, and the responsibility of the leader is to empower those people in the organization. Two types of empowerment is the responsibility of the leader. One, to help develop among people the sense that I want to take ownership. I want to take control of what's taking place in my and well, not just my organization, but the organization I'm involved with. I want to be able to do these things and I want to get involved. So it's not something that I have to tell you to get involved, but you have your own initiative. The second element that we need to be paying attention to is the creation of the environmental conditions that will promote that type of activity, which means we as a leader have those two elements. Inspire people to want to take that level of empowerment and create the environment for that to take place. Now, there are some problems that come along with this. All right. First off, in a lot of organizations, there is a lack of individuals in the fields that are willing to take on that level of responsibility because you have to motivate people to want to feel that level of involvement, that level of empowerment. So it is incumbent upon you to encourage people to do that in through different things. So some of the elements that you're going to talk about is to make sure that the climate that you create in the the organization is one that is going to encourage involvement and not punish people if they get involved and they make a mistake. So making mistakes is part of the learning process. All right. Now, when you do this type of empowerment and you people willingly take responsibility and take charge of things, it means you're preparing the next line of leaders that will replace you in the organization. And this is something that is dangerously, I should say, this is something that scares leaders because they start to see themselves as being irrelevant. There is one group that's going to look at servant leadership and they're going to look at followership and stuff like that in a little more detail, and this is part of that process. The nature of that type of leadership program or true empowerment here is that you are lifting others up in the organization and in giving them the tools necessary to perform the jobs and take responsibility for the direction and growth of the organization. It means that you are literally serving everybody else to be able to take over the role of running the organization and moving the organization forward. Most traditionalists believe that in doing so, it lessens the power that you have as the leader. All right? That's what the traditional models would say. In the relational leadership model, you become more powerful by making others more powerful in the organization. So that's the nature of it. And that brings us to the root word of empowerment, which is power. So we need to understand a little more about power and dynamics. There is a chapter that is going to be presented by one of the groups on power and influence. So this is where this element is going to be um, thrashed out in a lot more detail than I can do here. But a couple of things that we want to talk about here. So we have two forms of power. We have social power and positional power. So we have to look at the sources of power that that emerge in organizations, and we need to look at how traditionally power is seen as a zero-sum game, and the newer version of through the leadership program that we're looking at, we're not looking at it as a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean you have power and I don't, but power is something that we should share. So that type of power dynamic ranges over the power over, that's the autocratic approach, the power with, which is collaborative, and the power alongside, that's collegial approaches to the use of power and the relationships that we're able to develop. So when we start to speak about power, we need to talk about the sources of power. So there are three sources, well, there are five basic sources of power: expert power, referent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So these are the sources of where people get power from. All right. So expert power obviously kind of makes sense. So if you're the expert in a field, in some sort of professional or technical knowledge, that gives you that expertise in which everybody else will trust that you know what you're doing. So that's basically what we do. Reverent power is a little bit like expert power, but it has a lot more. It means It means that people look upon you as sort of this guiding person within an organization, and they look at you as, a sort of fount of wisdom. Generally, this applies to older members of an organization who are seen as sort of like gurus. They have a lot of institutional knowledge that helps with understanding why an organization operates the way it does, how things have transitioned over time, and that helps them to become a little more powerful or looked upon as having this type of reverent power. Legitimate power is the power ascribed to somebody based upon the position that they hold in the organization. So when you become the manager, there's a certain amount of power that comes to you as a manager. However, um, abusing power in that circumstance is a problem, and that's why legitimate power, is a very fragile type of power because you could damage that power very easily. So generally, the legitimate power gives you the option to practice coercive as well as reward power. So coercive power is punishment, basically. We use this in children a lot, but it happens at work. It means that you, as the manager, can utilize some coercive method to force people to do the job that they're supposed to do. All right. Of course, often using this too often creates serious problems with it. Okay. The opposite of that is reward power by giving something, things like raises, plaques, bonuses, and even just some simple, like a good job kind of behavior, like things like that. That type of reward power is also something that can be handed over by somebody who's a manager, but generally leaders can utilize that. Coercive power is not something, or reward power, being two sides of the same coin. They're not powers that you should be um, you know, working with too much, especially in modern organization. Coercive power is dangerous in the sense that it leads to repercussions that are oftentimes come with a lot of baggage that comes with it. All right. So sometimes we give people power or give up our power unnecessarily or unwittingly. So um, if there, there there are times we might give up our power because we are afraid of somebody else's disapproval. So it's sort of like how you all feel about your teacher, Miss Ferguson, because you might be afraid of what she might say about your project, but you might be giving that person power because you fear their disapproval. All right, but that is not necessary that they actually have that power over you. And I think if you ever tell her that you are afraid of her because of the disapproval she can provide for you, she might be very surprised to know that you all fear her, because I don't think she intends for anybody to be afraid of her. Understand what I'm talking about there? So it's something you might want to let her know so she could, reel it back in a little bit. But this happens a lot in meetings where we think we're talking about experts, and therefore we're afraid of saying something because we don't think we're expert enough or we don't have enough reverent power. So that fear creates an unwillingness to exercise your power because you're afraid you know, of stepping into somebody's lane, kind of thing. So it's something that you want to do. Another element is that we can give power over to people unnecessarily. So one of the things that like can happen, for example, is this one here. We give over power to somebody, but they don't really deserve it because we made assumptions about that individual. So I like this example that the text gave us, which is the group assumes that because you are an English major, that you would be best at writing the group. So like in this class here, for example, we might have a couple of IT people, and in the group activities, the IT people, you might look at them and say, hey, you guys could put the PowerPoint together, because you all know the stuff, but they might have no clue because they're not really doing PowerPoint and stuff like that. They're working on other stuff, or better yet, the graphics people here, we might look at them and say, hey, you all could design the PowerPoints for us for our presentations. We'll do all the rest of the work. And the person in the graphic arts saying, I don't like to do PowerPoints. I hate that stuff. All right, you understand what I'm talking about? So we give up this power, and it really isn't deserved. So that's something that also happens with power as well. Another aspect of understanding power is the power is not a finite resource. It is an unlimited amount of things that exist, and power shared is power amplified, meaning that the more in which I give away power, the more important I become in the organization. Traditional leadership models speak to hoarding power, and hoarding power is supposed to give you more power over people, and that is a mistake, because that hoarding of power means you are excluding people from decision making processes. You are making poorer decisions because you are basing those decisions upon limited information, and that is the drawback of the older system, where people hold on to power and they don't share it. In this model here, we have to give up that power and share it with others, empower them, to be able to make better decisions, to share their ideas, to share their perspectives, to want to suggest better ways to get things done. Because if we ignore and alienate and marginalize these individuals, they will not share, they will not add to your power base, they will not add to your knowledge base, and that therefore makes the organization weaker. All right. This is something that we find especially in political organizations, where power is seen as as a zero sum game. You either have all the power or you don't have the power at all. So we actually have some power sharing that is supposed to start taking place in the current government. And I know that it's causing a lot of headache within the party, because the way in which the leadership has decided to transition from one leader to another is a little tricky, because I don't think a lot of them are comfortable with the way it was being done, but simply because many people within the organization view power from that absolute game kind of situation that we speak about here. Um, and it's not from a relational point of view, but it's more from that zero sum game type of view that they look at there. All right. If you hold power, then you have to be held accountable. And that's important, because when you share power, you share responsibility and accountability, right? But at the end of the day, even if you um, delegate responsibility to other people, it does not mean you delegate tasks to other people. It does not mean that you delegate responsibilities. The responsibility of getting things done within an organization rests solely with the leader of the organization. If you've delegated activities and tasks to other people, you are not also delegating the responsibility. In fact, in a lot of incidents, there has happened where people use delegation to set people up. They give over a responsibility or some set of tasks to get done, do not provide them with the correct or the appropriate power levels to get the job done. When they fail, they use that as a means of bringing you down in the eyes of everybody around you. So it diminishes your standing in the organization. This is it's especially happens when you're trying to use that Machiavellian nonsense well, I shouldn't say nonsense, the Machiavellian approach to controlling people who challenge your power in an organization. So you give them something to do, they fail, and you use that failure to make it appear as if they're not ready. So you come in and save the day kind of situation. That is one of the worst ways you can treat your people in the organization, because after having done that once or twice, nobody in the organization is going to trust you, because they know you're a setup artist kind of be thing situation. Nobody's going to trust you. They understand exactly what what your whole thing is going to be about. You just want to get, you want to look good, but you don't necessarily want to do the work, if you understand. So that's something that we have to pay attention to. All right, 6 methods through which you might become empowered. So as both as a leader and but more so as a member of an organization. Education, um, learn more, get information, gather all the data and the information that you have. This is technical skills. Leading, take up leading opportunities when they come up. Help by inspiring and being an inspiration to other people to want to feel empowered. So take that up. Structuring, creating the environment in your day-to-day activities that lends itself to you being self-empowered. Providing the resources necessary to get your job done and empowering others to do the same. So the same way you want to make sure that you're not getting set up by somebody, you're getting the resources necessary to do the tasks that you've been asked to do or that you've chosen through your initiative to do, then make sure that you have the resources necessary to do that. Mentoring, mentoring those around you to actually, help them take on self-empowered positions. All right, be an inspiration to other people, and of course, actualization, which would be taking the time to my camera on, taking the time to make sure that you actually act upon that whole activity, which is be empowered in the organization and actually do it. Okay, leaders ought to value members of the organization who act like this, but a lot of people are challenged by it, and that's something that is important for us to pay attention to because far too often um, the people around us keep on losing some individuals. People in organizations are oftentimes threatened by people who are self-empowered, and that's unfortunate because, again, that has to do with the style of leadership that they are, accustomed to. In terms of empowerment, we spoke a bit about this before, and it comes back again. Mattering and marginalization. What we want to do is to make sure that everybody in our organization matters or feel that they matter. Not only what they do, but how they feel matters. Now, um, the best way for me to talk about this is to give you this by example. Oftentimes, I have seen in the past that executive staff in an organization treat custodial staff in a very hands off and even scornful manner. Now, any of y'all who have seen similar things in your organizations where you work or where you've operated can probably identify with this. But oftentimes I've found um, that a number of the senior faculty and senior executives within organizations treat the custodial staff in the college in a very poor manner because of the job they do. They clean. And when they do that, it makes the individual themselves, the custodial staff, feel as if their jobs are unimportant. But trust me, if the custodial staff stops working, what will happen with your organization? Anybody? What'll happen if you stop cleaning your house at home? Anybody willing to share what the likely outcome would be? Somebody must.
I don't like what you said.
Just dirty? Just
Overly
dirty.
good.
No, it'll become unlivable. It'll become unlivable. Similarly, the same thing in an organization. Custodial staffs are critical to the operations of all organizations. Why, therefore, do we treat with people like this? Anybody could give me a reason why I have seen, and the hard thing, and maybe, I shouldn't say this, but this is worse among women than it is among the men. Why is that?
So can you repeat the question again, please?
Why do women in executive positions in an organization treat other women who are in custodial positions with scorn and distaste? I've seen this more often than not among the females in organizations.
I don't know, maybe jealousy.
Why would an executive be jealous of a custodial staff member?
I don't know.
You don't know. So then what? Why would they scorn somebody like who's another human being?
So
You
they
think they're
look
better
it
than?
down on them like a
Yes, like that, Arissa. That's correct. They look down on Nadira.
Well, I was just about to say, like you're looking down on them. It's like a power thing in their head. You are lesser than me. Um,
Yeah, but it's
I made it to the top and you're not. I made
correct.
it in a field that
All
you
right.
can't make it. You can't. Well, and I shouldn't say can't. It's harder for you to make it in, just like it was for me. Like that kind of mentality. I'm trying to look for a better way to say it, but that.
Yeah, I want to ask all of you ladies here, don't ever be this, because that is a horrible, horrible way to treat other human beings that you work with. But I have seen it, and men do it too, but not all, fortunately. But people do it. But at the end of the day, as a leader, you have to lead your way. Yes, Julene, see your hand up. Well, you have to open your mic. I'm not hearing you. Miss Walcott, I'm not hearing you. I'm seeing the mic opening, but I'm not hearing you. Oh, okay. All right, I'm gonna have to move on. All right. So the objective here in making sure we empower everybody is for them to matter, and not only that, they must be seen to be mattered by the organization, so that we avoid marginalizing people in the organization. The way we marginalize people in society, we have to move people from the margin to the mainstream because we want their input. If we don't get their input, then it creates a lot of problems with the organization. The organization will be weaker if you don't pay attention to this marginalizing and making sure that everybody feels that it matters, that their job matters to the organization, that they're not at the margins, that the central operational activities within it. Don't ever make anybody feel that they don't matter and marginalize them in anything you do. Make them feel appreciated. That's that. At the end of the day, that's what you want to do, and that's part of the empowering environments that you're trying to create. Make sure that you're not blaming people, you're not setting people up, you're creating environments that will punish you if you fail. Those are the kind of things in the environment you want to pay attention to. You don't want to make anybody's job feel less important than anybody else's. Those are things that you want to, work on in your organization to make sure that you are encouraging people to take their initiative and do things, and don't wait for others to tell us what to do. All right. The unfortunate thing is that organizational culture tends to kind of negate against these kind of things. So, but you have to make the organizational culture one that is empowering generally. So, if this is especially true of older organizations that have existing cultures will crush any sort of new movement if they are unable to fight against that organizational culture. So if we think about the public sector or the public service, we can see that a lot of initiatives to try and make changes to the organization has been crushed by the organizational culture that exists within the service because they simply don't want it, or the culture is just so powerful that it really just stamps all of these things out. But it means that as a leader, you have more to do. The unfortunate thing is that in the public sector, that is a difficult process. We spoke about this delegation stuff, and we're not going to talk about it again, because in empowerment and delegation, you have to make sure that you're not setting people up and making them feel victimized by your actions. All right, that's something that you want to try to avoid across the board. So I think we get the idea. We got the idea of what this whole empowering environment has to be about. All right. So the next area is the ethical element of the model, and I can't say how much this is important because of the ethics or the gaps that we see around us on a regular basis. The relational leadership model emphasizes ethical and moral leadership, meaning leadership that is driven by values and standards, and leadership that is good in nature or moral. The word good or moral. All right. It is, this is probably one of the more imperative areas that the organization has developed, or this model focuses on the need for us to be ethical. So they go on in the discussion as to what is ethics and where it comes from, the Greek word and so on, and how ethical values are determined through society, and society kind of collectively gets together and determines what is morally correct or what is ethical. Now we have to remember that more ethics and morals is something that changes over time, um, and evolves pretty slowly actually. But there are changes that take place that some people look upon as being changes for the betterment. There are two chapters or two presentations that will tackle this area of ethics and ethical decision making. Um, One from the DAFT that looks has a more business approach, and one from the exploring leadership text that is going to look at it from the ethics and decision making mood, because we can't emphasize how important this is. All right. So, in essence, what we're speaking about here is that leadership within the organization has to be of the highest ethical standards. Now, the ethical values that we're talking about here has to be rules or ethical standards that is followed in all aspects of an individual's life. Now, this is where it becomes a little problematic, in the sense that the ethical standards that we're talking about here is something that has to be endemic in the practice of individuals across the board. The problem with this element here is that, again, it's aspirational in nature, and the way in which you might do something in your private environment is likely to be slightly different, but not significantly different than in the public environment. There's certain things that you're going to be looking at there, and this is why this aspect or this model is speaking to making sure that you have very high levels of ethical leadership, and that the leadership is values driven. So the values are driving your behavior, the values are driving your actions, your decisions. And these decisions and ethical values need to be a constant in the person's life, despite the where they are operating. So again, across the board here, we're talking about very high values across the board that we're trying to do. And the reason for this is because for far too often, we have been confronted by failure after failure in the leadership around us. And interestingly enough, we've come across situations where I don't know. It's almost as if we have gotten to the point where once you get into politics, we know you're going to thief. In fact, we hear these statements, all are we thief. You ever heard those statements in parliament and in political speech? All are we thief, and politics has a morality of its own, and all this kind of nonsense. And honestly, far too many people are, what is it, numb to the fact that when we think about the ethical behavior of leaders, we it's almost like we have a double standard for them. I don't know how many of you all feel that way in terms of our political leaders around us. Anybody has that kind of feeling for towards the political leadership of our country? Wow, unwillingness to communicate. Am I stepping on a corn? Or are you fearful of some sort of vilification?
So I think
Julia?
if this is a wish list that everyone has, I expecting our leaders to be upright, honest, and ethical, but in reality, it does not happen.
No, that's the hard part about and you know the bad thing about it, Julia, is that we come to expect it. And that's the hard part about it. Why should we not expect our people to be upright, honest, and ethical in their dealings? But yet still we forgive, well, we're not even forgiving. We just simply roll with it when we get up and we read about this one do this and this one did that. And you know, why are we being, as a population, being so apathetic towards this valueless political leadership that we have to select every 5 years for leadership in this country? I don't understand our thinking as a people and why we listen to the same rubbish every year and we don't change our decision making. Is there a different choice that we can make? And this has led to a lot of people stopping. Um, they just basically given up voting because they're so disenchanted with the options and the choices that are available that they just don't bother. So that's something that we have to actually measure, and it's easily seen. You have to look at something in during any elections. You need to pay attention to the participation rate. How much of the population that was eligible to vote actually voted? And I remember in some years we had less than 40% of the population actively participating in elections. And that's a dangerous thing. It means you're talking about 60% of a country not bothering to vote because they don't trust, they don't, they have no confidence in the leadership around them. So that's a scary thing, because now you have a silent majority of people who have no, they don't want to participate in it, which means they're not going to respect any decisions made by the government. Yes, Julia, go ahead.
So I looked at the US election extensively, and I look when I compare it to the elections in Trinidad and Tobago, I
Mm.
see that we focus more on personalities than on
Mm-hmm.
issues. For them, it was about job security, taxes, and all of that. Yes, the
Mm-hmm.
personalities came in, but it was very small. But in Trinidad, it's like all about personalities.
Yeah, generally tends to be. And but one area of similarity that I saw in both is people were people were, well, how do I say this? People voted because of what they feared, because they feared the other side, and that's a tactic that's also used here in Trinidad. You try to paint the opposition as these boogeymen, and you um, make people afraid of what they might do, or they, if you understand. So that fear factor became part of the strategies that both here and abroad they use the same kind of fair strategy. Also, the other strategy that we use in this country, like they do in the states as well, you have the divide between Republicans and Democrats. In our country, we have the divide between Indian and African, which is more basic, what we call grassroots type of politics here. That is to our detriment, because we are using those differences to apparently align ourselves with parties that are supposedly representative of, your ethnic um, interests. The reality is that none of those parties really care whether you're Indian or not. They have different things that they're looking for. All they need is for you to support them, and once they get into power, they forget about us and they continue right along, just being unethical, doing what they want, sweetheart deals here, kickbacks there, you know, and yet still the population just sits back and takes it, and that is really a huge challenge, which is why again we want to start to push people towards making some sort of changes in the leadership that we see around us, because this status quo has been going on for far too long. The ethical concerns of our population is neither here nor there. It's almost laughable when we look at it. All right. So I think I think everybody kind of gets the idea of what the ethical elements are going to be. See if there are any key things that we're missing here. Yeah, we spoke about all of this is that we what we just spoke about here, and types of apathetic behaviors that we see among leadership now. Um, the as I said, the biggest issue, and you're going to see it as one of the criticisms of this model. The biggest criticism of this model is that because it's aspirational in nature, some of it may be a bit of a bit difficult to realize in the real world. But again, what is the best way to do it? Find an example that we could try to follow. That is not an easy an easy route to travel. So if we look for an ideal, and if we fall short, you never know. You get somewhere. So one of the elements here is leading by example, and this is something as well. What we expect of our leaders is that they would be, good guys in essence, and we would want, as a leader, you would want that same sort of behavior from the people who participate in the organization, your followership. So if I lead with it by example, I'm giving the so like Jesus, Jesus led a particular life, and um, we want to emulate Jesus and walk that road. So that is the whole point of leading by example, based upon that particular thing. Too often, leaders are focused on more along the lines of, do what I say, but not what as I do. This quotation here, what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say, because if you look at children in particular and you try to correct their behavior, they will do some things that will indicate to you that you have, slipped up, because they will behave in a manner that they see you behave in, regardless of what you say, right? Because they're going to copy your actions. They're not focused on your words. And it's the same thing for our leaders. We are focused on what they do, not what they say. So, regardless of what they speak about, what we see, if there's a disconnect between what you say and what you do, we're going to draw conclusions and judge you based upon that, which is why leading by example. So you have to say and mean what you so you have to act in the same vein as what you speak about. So you can't say one thing and do another. All right. Um, the other issue here is, if, let's say, for instance, we have this really fantastic new party that comes up, and we get these genuine individuals to take over and get into positions of power. What do you think will likely to happen to those guys when they get into office? Who's going to confront them? Who are the first of the people that will meet them in the office? Who do you think? What do you think is likely to happen to them? All right.
So I think they will get fight down from both whoever the two parties that was,
No, no.
in power before.
No, we're saying we get a windfall change, and we have brand new people in the party, both in opposition and in government. We have a nice kind of consensus building model. What is likely to happen with these new emergent leaders in government? What will happen?
They will most likely get corrupted like the last government.
How?
I don't know. When people get in positions of power, things change.
Well, how do they change? Think about it. How
They
do
move
Um,
the
people?
goalposts, as they say.
What's that? Julia, go ahead. Say what you're saying.
They move the goalposts, as they say.
Who moves the goalposts? You're
The
talking in
new,
riddles here, you know.
the newbies, the new ones in position.
Uh-huh.
They
What they
tend
do?
to follow and emulate from their predecessors.
That's true. There's some truth to that. Yes, Snags. What do you think?
So I think if the new group have a positive impact, the old people want to change, so they will come in power instead of the new one. You know what I mean?
Uh, okay, maybe. But what about if they can't come back into power? Because this new group proves to the this country that they do it the right way. All right, guys. So you're missing the bigger picture because the government is only one element in society. The people who actually hold power are those people who control the capital of a country. And it may be the people within the country or people outside of the country. So we have to think about what happens when somebody arrives in a leadership position in a country, in a political thing. They are going to be presented with options by people from within the country and outside of the country, and they will be offered or made offers to do things for their own for the gain of those particular power bases outside there in our society. Here we're talking about the business sector, the underworld, the drug sector, the international business environments. They're going to come in and they're going to make offers to get certain things. They want access to this. They want to be able to do certain things. And how do they do it? They oftentimes they come into that situation, and the leader is then presented with all of these opportunities and temptations to trade off. You understand? Personal gain for access to, let's say, for example, you want to give a particular business place or business people or consortium of businesses want access to a particular parcel of land. They come and say, well, if you give us that, we could get a little kickback on this end, or we have this thing we could set up for your retirement. And so start thinking about this. So there are two elements that could come across. Some will come across with those kind of bribes that they offer in, very sneaky ways. The other thing to the possibility exists, they could come in and threaten them. You could say, well, if you don't want to play games or you don't want to take these types of deals, then be prepared to step up your game and make sure you protect yourself, because the next person coming not coming with money, they're coming with something else. They're coming with guns. Um, and that is something, if you are interested in hearing about this, there's been a history of this type of activity, especially in Caribbean and Latin American markets. There's a book that you could read, and the guy who wrote the book also did some podcasting on YouTube, called Diary of an Economic Hitman, where, as a representative of the IMF and the World Bank, he would go into particular countries and provide for them the options of developing certain aspects of the country's um, basically developing certain aspects of the country's resources, especially those with oil or minerals. They want access to that. In particular, they also want access to their water supplies. And they will go in there and make all these nice offers of, they will build hospitals for you, they will do this, they do this. All we want to do is to get access to these things and get ownership of it, and we be able to exploit it so that the international company can make the money, the corporate oligarchy, as they refer to it as. And in a lot of instances, especially in the Latin American countries where there have been resistance to that type of thing, and the persons who sat in those offices, they decided not to, or they negotiated very tough deals where no, international businesses can't own these resources, but we would lease them, and you have to pay this amount of money for this amount. They eventually assassinated them. So if you ever look back in the history of Latin American countries, you'd see a lot of leaders who've come to power and just disappeared. Happened in Venezuela a few times as well. Um, if you, as I said, if you're interested in that, read that textbook or read that. I should say textbook. Read that novel or that book, um, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I when I read the first version of that, it was really eye-opening. Something that you could look at, and that is something that presents itself today. Probably not in that extensive method, but understand it still happens because a lot of businessmen will want to get favors, and to get those favors from the political people, they're going to make considerations and they're going to offer people things. And this is how leaders get derailed by this pressure. And the pressure will only come from the outside forces, and there'll be people within the organization, the political organization, that'll come to you and tell you, no, that we don't play the game this way. We had to do things like this. We need their support to be able to get back into power the following year. We need their money to flow, and you get that kind of nonsense going on, and that's how you end up basically corrupting the people who are in positions, and then eventually, nobody really wants to do the work of looking after the country, and you have to be really hard and focused to be able to do this. you know so it's not an easy process. This process is a difficult process, because the pitfalls are going to be many, and they're going to be you know right there, always going to be at the back of your mind to get things done. Having high ethical standards is not an easy thing. um, and to be fearless and stand alone sometimes is even more problematic. So it's not an easy thing that we're asking for here. It's a difficult thing, which is why when we look at it from a realistic point of view, the model itself has this criticism that this the ethical values that we're talking about is a very laudable thing, but it's very difficult to put into practice. All right, because too often we get these horror stories of exposure of different things. In fact, most of the movies we look at, we see it, and there are documentaries about those same things that we talked about before. Now, the last element that we want to talk about here is the relational leadership model and its process orientation. We said at the very beginning that all the things that we talked about here are process oriented. Now, why would we want something to be process oriented? Is because we want to be able to repeat the actions again and again and get similar, if not better, outcomes. Process orientation means we are following a step by step process that allows us to measure, verify what we're doing, and improve what we're doing, and measure the outcomes from time frame to time frame. Everything is process oriented. It means that we are able to regularly review and and improve or change the things we're doing to make sure. So it's not a one and done deal. It's not a one time story. Each element of being inclusive, being ethical, being purpose driven, and so on, they're all based on process orientation. So the vision and goals of an organization have to go through a process of being reviewed from time to time to make sure that the vision and goals of the organization, if you go back here, is reviewed from time to time to make sure that the purpose is matching, that we are, our purpose is relevant, because sometimes the organization's vision and position can become irrelevant in the changing environment. The inclusive actions that we talked about here, that's a process that we have to engage in on a regular basis to ensure that we are doing the right things to be an inclusive organization. That is a process. So those kind of things, like, which is one of the reasons why human resource management exists, for example. They're supposed to be the stalwarts of inclusivity, to make sure that we are not, um, hurting people by excluding them from different things. So we're making sure that we are being fair and honest. This whole process of empowerment, same thing. It's process oriented, being ethical, all of them are process oriented approaches, allows us to ensure that whatever we're doing is repeatable and measurable, and that we can, from time to time, make changes that will allow us to make um, definitive adjustments to ensure that the output improves over time. Processes mean that the outcomes that we are looking for are, are gotten there intentionally and not just by coincidence or incidents. All right. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is on a regular basis, we're getting these things over and over again. It's sort of like, have you ever really thought about how you go about a semester in terms of how you go through the work that you do and how you deal with your classes and stuff like that, how you deal with your assignments and your group work and all that type of stuff? That is the same thing. If you look upon um, your activities in the classroom from a process way and treat with it like a process, you're more than likely going to have um, the ability to make positive changes faster if you treat with the way in which you go about doing your work and assessing your progress through the program in a process oriented manner. Everybody understands what process orientation is, right? Let's make sure that we're on the same page with that. Ms. Daly, can you explain to me what do I mean by process orientation?
Um, I'm thinking, no, I have like a general idea of what it is, but to put it into words right now.
Uh-huh.
uh,
Okay. So maybe I need to check this. So, all right. So, Miss Daly, do you cook?
occasionally, yes.
All right. Do you can you bake a cake?
Yes, I can.
What's the process of getting that done?
Okay, so basically you're getting your ingredients together first. Your
Mm-hmm.
flour, your eggs, sugar, milk sometimes, butter,
Uh-huh.
and you're going through the process of putting everything in the bowl.
Everything all at
Uh,
once?
so, but not all at once. Sifting out your dry ingredients first, which
Uh-huh.
is your flour, your baking soda or your baking powder,
Uh-huh.
um, sugar, etc., and then
So you
dealing
don't
with
put
your wet
the
ingredients.
you don't put the butter and the sugar together and cream the butter as the first step?
Depends on what cake I'm making. A lot
Okay.
of the times, a lot of the times I just laze my way through, and it comes
Really?
out right. So I'm
Okay.
sticking to the lazy process.
Okay. All right, Nadira, I saw your hand up. Are you gonna ask a question or make a statement?
No, no, I was gonna answer your question.
Go ahead
What is
first.
process oriented?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
What is
well, um, it I would say it more focuses on taking steps to complete a specific task.
Mm-hmm.
That's what process orientation is.
Which is why I was asking Jian to describe how she makes a cake.
Right,
And
okay. Yes,
right?
and that's why I lower my hand. It kind of was a little out of timing. The
Right?
same
No.
when
All
you
right. No, but you're correct. In the technicality of process orientation is the step by step process of getting to from one end to the next. All right, from
yeah.
input to output, right? And we could check along the way whether or not things went right or wrong, because we are deliberately using a particular type of process to get from one point A to B. The problem with a relational leadership model, it is something that is trying to predict human behavior and human outcomes, which is less reliable than a scientific methodology. But what we're doing here, as with most of social science, is we are trying to utilize scientific approaches to human issues and human problems. You follow? So it means that though we are going to go through processes that we set up on a step by step basis, like creaming the butter, um, melting the butter, creaming it with the sugar, then adding your eggs, then adding your other dry ingredients and mixing it slowly in, and depending upon, like, if you're making a sponge cake, right? Isn't that what I kind of describing them as daily, a sponge cake,
Yes, exactly.
right? And then you add your essence if you want, whatever essence like orange essence or almond essence or whatever it is, what flavor you want, and then you put it in your well, you prep your bowl and you put it to bake, right? With your wax
Don't
paper,
forget
if
to preheat your oven.
right, yes, exactly. That's important because if I don't preheat the oven, it probably stay like a piece of lead in the bottom, right? Yes, preheat the oven, pre-grease your pans as well, or your molds or whatnot. And then when it's at the temperature, you put it in, you monitor the time, because it's only supposed to be about, I think, not more than 20 minutes, right?
Yes, about
Um,
15
um,
to 20,
20
depending.
minutes, depending upon the temp that you're using and the efficiency of your oven, because that's also a problem too. Some ovens are more efficient than others because of their manufacturer status and their ability to with hold the heat. So it's the same thing that we try and Troy is having a real problem coming into class by. All right. So it's the same thing we're talking about here, except that it's a little more problematic because we're trying to use process orientation to govern a basic human type of activity. All right. But if we are able to hold to this type of process orientation, we are likely to have more consistency in our output and consistency in the approach in which we're doing on dealing with these things, because we're always going to be consistently doing the things on a regular basis over and over again. So the concept about relational leadership processes is that it is not a one and done. It is something that we are going from time to time, we're going to have to go through that process and try it again. The model is not meant to be once run through once and then you reach the apex of where you're going. The expectation is that you and the organization, both as a leader and as followers, will grow into better leadership, decision making, grew into sort of better relationships across the board. So it's not something that we expect will happen overnight. It's a committed process that you need to get to. It's sort of like being, developing your own ethical values. You're not gonna get it right away. There are some values that you have that follow you from your life that may not necessarily be the right values for the organization. Then you're not necessarily the right fit. Doesn't mean that we throw you away. No, you make changes, you adjust, and you come again. Nobody's perfect. The same thing about, attempting to be empowering in the organization. You might try different techniques to empower people and to encourage people, and it don't quite work the first time, or you don't have the kind of output that you're looking for. Does it mean that you try the same thing over again? No, you make changes, and because you want to try and adjust what you're doing in the past, changing the process that you're utilizing to try and improve the outcomes that you're looking at. So it's the same thing like I was asking you all in terms of evaluating the way you go through your semesters and how you go about dealing with your work. If you're having successful outcomes and you're getting good grades, A's and B pluses and stuff like that, then obviously um, you may not need to tweak stuff as much. But if you're having problems and you're having inconsistency in your performances in different types of classes, then you might need to pay attention to the process of how you go about treating with your work in the various types of classes. Or do you have particular challenges that you need to deal with? This is, again, process orientation can be applied to anything, um, and any aspect of life. So something that you want to think about working across the board. So here in this thing, in this particular aspect, in the model, we're talking about ensuring that the model, all aspects of the model are approached in a process manner. And that process requires that we pay attention to the stages of the development and ensure that we are, making the necessary improvements required to see the outcomes that we want to see. All right. So again, it's almost like vision We are paying attention to division. So we need there's several processes that are essential to this to the whole model. These process includes collaboration, reflection and feedback, civil confrontation, community building, and a level of profound understanding called meaning making. Now, these are the essential processes in the whole thing: collaboration, working together, reflection, looking backwards, retrospective analysis of what is taking place, of what we've done, feedback, making sure that people in the organization as well as the process itself is giving you feedback information to tell you what's working, what's not, what's okay, what could be adjusted. Civil confrontation, meaning that we expect conflict, we expect disagreement, but we approach them from a civil manner, not in some sort of cuss down, cough down behavior. All right, community building, meaning that we are building a community within our organization, that we are all part and parcel of this community because it matters to everybody, and that's the last level here, the development of meaning making. We it This organization means a lot to me. I feel fit, and it means to me from a logical perspective. I understand it and I want it, but it also is something that I believe in. My heart move goes out for it. I want to give it my all. I am committed to it. I have my passion for it to be developed in this particular manner. So those are the nature of the processes that we're looking at there across the board. Um, so this is where we're going to be kind of focusing our attention in terms of the process orientation. So a lot of times what we have to be paying attention to is looking at what we're doing and why we're doing it this way and can we do it better. That's part of the beginning process when we are doing the evaluation of what we're doing. We we have to always question why we do things the way we're doing it, and is there the possibility of doing it better. Um, this is again, apply this to the way in which you approach your classes. Why do you do things the way you do it, and could it be done better? Um, so that's the first thing you want to start to deal with. Um, we have to look at the idea of working together, collaboration, and cooperation. Now, a lot of people see collaboration and cooperation as a weaker version of competition, because the main thought here is that being competitive leads to better, the strongest person arriving in positions of leadership and that type of stuff. The problem with competition, because it's something that is embedded in our education system, it's embedded in a business and well, our legal system, the free market economy, all those things push for competition. But is this really the best way in which we can deal with things? The model is saying no. Cooperation and collaboration actually leads to better, more informed decisions. Because consider, the competitive nature means one person rises to the leadership position, or one person rises to the top. The rest of everybody is left behind. How does that make everybody feel? Right? Let's look at it from that perspective alone. Secondly, the one person making decisions, because they through the competition arrived in that position of leadership, is making decisions only based upon their perception and their understanding of the world around them. They don't care about the other people, or is not taking those other positions and point of views and realities in making a decision. So again, you get better decisions when you collaborate and work together than when you work alone. Remember what we said, all of us are smarter than one of us. Remember that, collectively smarter. All right, so this is why the process requires that we utilize collaborative and cooperative approaches to making the decisions and making changes in the organization. We are always dependent upon each other, giving feedback and first responses and gathering data collectively and analyzing what's happening so that we can make better decisions and we're not competing with each other. All right. Um, that's something that we have to pay attention. So we could move through this pretty quickly because that's the basic point that they're making here. Um, Meaning making, we spoke about this. It has to be meaningful, as I said before, from a logical or cognitive point of view, as well as the emotional point of view. This passion that we have for the organization. So both from the leader's position as well as the follower's position, there is this need for us to want to act, to to commit to it, to be passionate about our organization. Now, this is not necessarily something that's going to happen in all of the things you get involved with in life. But as a leader, you want to try and make sure that the people with whom you're working in this organization for yourself can see as well as appreciate the level of commitment and passion that you're putting towards this particular activity. This is the type of leaders that we're looking for, especially if you're talking about a leader of a country. You want people to really, yes, you're logically designed to work on this and try to pull the country together and move us forward in a logical manner. But you also want to have some love of your country to and those kind of things would help you to negate against the negative influences around you. That will help to you know to negate those kind of things around you. All right, Bramble. Okay. So we understand that meaning making, and that is across the board for everybody. If you want to make sure that it means something, um, because without it meaning something for people, they're not gonna get committed to it. They're not gonna pay attention to it. The process will be uh, null and void across the board. So something else we need to talk about here: reflection and contemplation. This is another part of the process that we have to get involved with. Far too often we ignore the need for reflection and contemplation because of how fast the world is moving. As a leader and as an organization, we need to take time to reflect on what took place in the past, not only paying attention to what went wrong, but also paying attention to what went right. Because we need to know what we did correctly to make sure we repeat it. What we also want to know what went wrong so that we could correct it. But we're also evaluating, well, why exactly is it wrong? So we have to use some really critical analysis. The unfortunate thing is this is going to take time, and it's something that we have to regularly do. Now, if you think about this in your own personal life, you'd understand when is the last time you actually did some serious reflection about who you are and why you are where you are. Okay, and why are these particular things happening to me, or why do these things keep on happening to me? Have you really assessed your behavior, your contribution to it, or is it everybody have it against me in the world, nobody like me kind of nonsense thinking along those lines? You need to spend some time regularly reflecting on your life and making some level of reflection and looking for causative factors. All right. Not everything is wrong. Some things are right. So you can't only focus on the negative, you have to focus on the positive as well. And understand why it's working as opposed to other areas where things may be going through. This reflection and contemplation is something that organizations used to do a lot of in the past. But it has kind of fallen out of favor because of the relative expense of it. But as a leader, I would suggest that you try to encourage this on a personal level, and as well as at organizational levels for most organizations to take place there. That reflection and contemplation is something that is really important, but it requires quiet time. You can't engage in reflection and contemplation without you know um, disconnecting from the world around you to be able to do that. In fact, the assessment that you all are working on, your self-assessment, requires this type of approach. You have to disconnect and kind of think backwards to write up that paper. So it's not a sit down and write in one go. I think you all are going to have to spend some time, um, collecting your information, your thoughts before you, and going through this contemplative type of um, process to really kind of set yourself up for it, which is why the assessment that we have set up actually kind of forces you into reflection and contemplation, because it's a kind of practice and process that you ought to be taking, that ought to happen with you fairly regularly across your timeline. So the importance of this is because if you're to make meaningful changes in your life, as you might want to within an organization, to make meaningful changes, it is important for you to put in the time to get it done. All right. I like the statement here that metacognitive is thinking about one's thinking. It's kind of tautology, kind of going in thing. Metacognitive reflection is thinking about how you think, and considering, essentials for effective learning and problem solving. It sounds like madness, right? You could go mad thinking about, I'm thinking about how I think. What does that mean, Well, how do you go about thinking the way you are? It's really interesting. Can we reflect as a group? That's something that it might be difficult to do because you could get yourself straight. But as I said before, in the past, organizations would do this. They would do group things, group reflections, and that type of stuff. The way in which it's done usually is there's quiet time where you sit and you ask a question and you write your responses out, and then you share your responses in what we call plenary sessions. It's something that couples could do as well. You know, identify some issue or problem or some event, and you sit down and you write about it, and then you exchange your writings with the next person, so that you share how you feel. Now, you're not supposed to judge. All right. Unfortunately, human beings can't help but judge, right? But those are the kind of things that or activities you get involved with. You know, why did this go so well? What did we do together that makes this happen? How did we make sure this works well again together? This is the type of things that you want to go through. Not only focusing on the negatives, but also focusing on what worked. What helped get us to where we are. So reflections is a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work, and I'm in the assignments that I'm giving you. It's going to ask for a fair amount of that to be done. So retreats are usually the approaches that we used to use in the past. I don't see it happening. Anybody who works for organization that still does some sort of retreat activity. I know my department tries to do it, possibly once a year at least. We kind of break away from the organization and try and set ourselves aside and go into a neutral environment and try and do something as well as celebrate and type of things like that. Anybody still works in organizations that does retreats? No? All right. Hopefully some of you all will eventually get to that. So this is part of the process that we have to run through to be able to get the whole thing running across the board. All right, so this is a lot of information here in a short space of time that we've gone through, and I don't need you to memorize any of this, because remember, what I want you to do is really be a little more comfortable with it, understand what the relational leadership process is about, what the model is like, um, get to understand that whole situation that we keep on talking about in terms of the model and the way it looks, this inclusive empowerment purpose. So hopefully this model means something now, because you understand what the relational leadership model is. Now, to assist you with a little bit of the review, I'm going to copy this link for you guys into the WhatsApp chat for you to do it on your own, because I know we've had a long session tonight this evening, and I don't want to keep you all much more. Where is our chat? All right, here we are. So I no, it's Tuesday. I need. Is this? Oh, today is Tuesday. What is wrong with me? Drunk. That's what it is. All right. So guys, look at this little YouTube video, and it kind of reviews the this same model that we've been looking at, the relational leadership model, and you'll get a really good idea. A short, it's not a very long video, it's about 3 to 4 minutes long. So feel free to look at it, and it gives you a quick review of the entire model itself, as well as some of its criticisms of criticisms as well. Interestingly enough, it was put together by students in terms of assessing this. Anybody has any questions they would like to ask at this point in time? Anything they want clarified?
Yes,
I
sir.
want. Yes, go ahead.
Um, the chapter, I'm not seeing the chapter for the presentation on courage and moral leadership for presentation 5 in the
Presentation
book.
5. All
In the
right. So
book.
this, yeah, this is on the Daft, the second book. You see the
What?
title here, Daft? You have to go to the Daft textbook.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong book.
Right.
Yeah.
Remember, we're doing the majority of the exploring leadership text, but the Daft is where we get some alternative views to some of the same content that we're looking at in the other side. Yeah?
Okay, thanks.
So make sure you go to the Daft. Anything else? Anybody else? Good question, though. Make sure you know the difference between which textbook you're supposed to be working with. So all of those that are coming from the Daft will carry this Daft phrase next to it here, the name. All right. So you see the same things I'm talking about in that model, the understanding others, integrity and moral purpose, teams and groups. All these chapters reinforce what we just looked at in chapter 3. All right, everything here, being in communities, complex organizations, vision, strategy, all these things, power, influence, leading change, all of these things are encompassed inside that relational leadership model. So what you all are doing is you're drilling into the nitty-gritty of each one of the elements across the board. All right. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This is my last presentation. Next week we start student presentations. We then have a break for carnival, and then um, we kind of clock on from there. We also have to do some additional work in terms of preparing for the debate activities and such. So I want to thank you all for being here with us tonight. I hope everybody understood everything. I don't expect that you would grasp everything all at once, but at the same time, I'm hoping that you've at least understood what elements have been presented here and can see the linkages moving forward. Any questions? Stacy? No? All right, guys. So I want to stop the recording and also simultaneously wish you all good night. Oh, yes, Miss Augustine, Miss Williams.
So, I didn't hear which book or what chapter coming from for group 2.
Group 2? Group 2 comes from the main text, Exploring Leadership. Is it group 2 or presentation 2?
Presentation 2.
Right, that comes from the Exploring Leadership text. You downloaded both textbooks,
Okay, thanks.
right? Okay. All right, guys. Good night. Hope everything's okay. I'll see